If you think modern life is hard, imagine living in a time when every single day was a struggle for survival. The Middle Ages, often romanticized in movies and stories, were nothing like the shining castles, grand banquets, and gallant knights we see on screen. In reality, life in medieval times was brutal, dirty, and often deadly. From the food people ate to the work they performed, from the diseases they battled to the justice system they endured, surviving in the Middle Ages was a constant test of endurance. Let's start with the most basic necessity: food. Forget the lavish feasts with mountains of meat and piles of fruits shown in movies. For the average peasant, meals were simple, repetitive, and far from appetizing. Most people subsisted on pottage, a thin, watery stew made from vegetables, grains, and sometimes bits of meat if they were lucky. This stew would simmer for days, often containing not just the ingredients, but also bugs, grit, and dirt. Bread, the staple of the medieval diet, was dense and hard, and like the fluffy white bread we enjoy today, medieval bread was dark, heavy, and full of stones and other contaminants from the poorly ground flour. Many people, unknowingly, consumed a fungus called ergot, which grew on rye and could cause hallucinations, burning sensations, or even death. Some historians believe widespread ergot poisoning contributed to the witch hunts, as entire communities would hallucinate at the same time, convinced their neighbors were practicing dark magic. Meat was a rare luxury. When peasants did get meat, it was often spoiled, as there was no refrigeration. To mask the taste, those who could afford spices would use them liberally. The poor had no such option, and had to endure the stench and risk of sickness. Drinking water was equally dangerous. Most sources were contaminated with human and animal waste. As a result, everyone, including children, drank weak beer or ale. This ale was far weaker than what we know today, but safer to consume than water, as the brewing process killed harmful germs. Children regularly consumed ale with meals, not as a treat, but as a necessity. Fish, when available, was typically preserved by drying or salting, which made it taste rancid and smell even worse. For inland dwellers, fresh fish was a rare sight, arriving days or even weeks old. To drink, to eat, and to survive, medieval people had to adapt to conditions we would find unthinkable today. Hygiene was almost non-existent. Bathing was infrequent, usually reserved for spring and late summer. People believed bathing opened the pores to disease, so they went months without washing. Lice infestations were common, and special combs were standard household items. Toilets, if they existed, were primitive at best. Most households relied on chamber pots, which were emptied directly into the streets or collected by workers known as gong farmers, whose job it was to remove human waste from cesspits. Public sanitation was a nightmare. Rivers were polluted, and the stench of decay and human waste permeated towns. Work was grueling. The majority of people were peasants, laboring from sunrise to sunset to tend fields owned by nobles. Farming involved plowing with wooden tools, sowing seeds by hand, and harvesting crops with sickles. During harvest, peasants might work 16-hour days under the scorching sun, burning thousands of calories just to survive. Trades such as blacksmithing, tanning, and carpentry were no less harsh, often exposing workers to toxic fumes, dangerous equipment, and chemicals that could ruin their health. Apprenticeships began at age 7, and young children worked long hours under strict masters for years before gaining any skill or freedom. Even if one survived the daily toil, disease was omnipresent. Medicine was primitive. Illnesses were attributed to bad air, evil spirits, or imbalances of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Treatments included bloodletting, leeches, and herbal concoctions that often killed faster than the disease. Epidemics were common, with childhood mortality rates reaching 30% and life expectancy rarely exceeding 40 years. Dental hygiene was non-existent, and tooth decay was universal. Mercury and other dangerous substances were prescribed liberally, with little understanding of side effects. The justice system was equally merciless. Laws varied from village to village, and the concept of innocent until proven guilty was virtually non-existent. Accusations often led to immediate presumption of guilt. Trials by ordeal were common. Accused individuals might be forced to carry red-hot irons, submerged in water, or subjected to torture devices such as the rack or Iron Maiden. Confessions were coerced under extreme pain, and punishment was often public, brutal, and designed to terrorize. Minor offenses could result in amputation or death. Public executions were community events, drawing crowds who treated them like festivals, complete with food and drink. Meanwhile, nobles and the wealthy could often escape punishment through bribery, blood money, or trial by combat, leaving commoners to bear the full force of medieval justice. Warfare was a constant threat. Unlike the clean, heroic battles depicted in stories, real medieval combat was chaotic, bloody, and lethal. Knights in full armor were rare. Most soldiers wore minimal protection and wielded weapons that were often makeshift adaptations of farming tools. Battles, like those during the 100 Years' War, decimated entire populations. Disease, starvation, and exposure claimed more lives than combat itself. Sieges were particularly horrifying, as armies would surround towns and castles, forcing inhabitants into starvation, consuming rats, pets, and eventually each other. Even if one survived, armies frequently pillaged surrounding villages, burning crops, killing livestock, and leaving civilians destitute. Daily life outside of warfare was no reprieve. The air was thick with smoke from open fires, the stench of uncollected waste, slaughterhouse remains, and unwashed bodies. People carried small pouches of herbs to mask odors, but the relief was minimal. Clothing was uncomfortable, rarely washed, and made from coarse materials. Most households consisted of a single room where families lived, worked, and slept, often sharing beds with strangers or servants. Entertainment was limited, violent, or rare public executions, animal baiting, traveling performers, or occasional storytelling provided brief distraction from the hardships of survival. The social hierarchy was rigid. About 90% of the population were peasants who owned nothing and were bound to the land. Mobility was almost impossible, and knowledge was scarce, filled with superstition. Witches, demons, and magical creatures were believed to be real, and natural phenomena could spark mass panic. Communication was slow, with news taking weeks or months to travel even short distances. In this world, comfort was non-existent. Modern luxuries, antibiotics, indoor plumbing, deodorant, stable food supplies, human rights were unimaginable. Every day was a struggle against hunger, disease, filth, and violence. Even if you survived infancy, childhood, and youth, life remained a series of brutal challenges that few could endure. Living in the Middle Ages required toughness beyond imagination, a constant awareness of danger, and the resilience to face hardship in all its forms. The past may seem romantic in books and films, but in reality, it was a harsh, relentless, and often terrifying world. For most, survival was the only goal, and even that was never guaranteed.